God works in mysterious ways, and one of the greatest mysteries is how he removes people from our lives who are not meant to be there. We can often look around at the relationships we have formed and wonder why some people stay and others leave. We form bonds, invest time, and give our trust, only to find that in the end, those very people were never supposed to be in our lives for the long haul. Sometimes those individuals who were once close to us can hurt us, hold us back, or even mislead us. But what we don't always realize is that God, in his infinite wisdom, is orchestrating a divine plan that includes not only bringing the right people into our lives, but also removing the wrong ones. And when he does this, we must trust that his timing is perfect. Have you ever been through a season where someone you thought would be in your life forever suddenly disappears? Perhaps someone you thought was a friend, a confidant, or even a partner. When they leave, it can be painful. It can feel like a betrayal. You question yourself and wonder why things ended the way they did. But what if I told you that this removal is actually an act of love? What if I told you that God is not punishing you by removing these people, but rather protecting you from something you couldn't see? He knows the paths they are on, and he knows the paths that you need to walk. Sometimes people come into our lives for a season, a reason, or a lesson. And when that purpose is fulfilled, God steps in to close that door, not to hurt us, but to elevate us. God doesn't want anyone to stay in your life that will pull you backward. He doesn't want anyone around you who will distract you from your purpose. God is constantly working behind the scenes, orchestrating the right connections and at times cutting the wrong ones. We may not always understand why certain people come into our lives or why certain people have to leave, but we must trust that God is working things out for our good. Sometimes the wrong people are those who lead us away from the path God has planned for us. They may try to convince us to compromise our values, tempt us to stray from our principles, or drain us of the energy and joy that God has intended for us. We can be surrounded by individuals who speak negativity into our lives, constantly reminding us of our flaws, mistakes, and shortcomings. These are the people who stir up confusion, doubt, and fear in our hearts. And while they may seem harmless at first, God sees the long-term impact they will have on our destiny. There are also those who come into our lives for a season to teach us something. God uses people as vessels to bring us lessons that we would not learn any other way. We may face a difficult relationship, an uncomfortable situation, or even betrayal. And in the midst of it all, God is teaching us patience, wisdom, and discernment. But once that lesson is learned, God knows that it's time for them to go. Holding on to the wrong people out of fear or habit only keeps us from walking into the fullness of what God has planned for us. We have to be willing to let go, even when we don't understand why they must leave. I know it's difficult to let go of people we've invested so much of ourselves in. We've shared our hopes, our dreams, our vulnerabilities. We've trusted them with our hearts. But sometimes the people we trust the most can be the very ones who are toxic to our growth. And when God removes them, it's not to leave us empty, but to make room for the right people, those who will love us, support us, and encourage us in the direction God is calling us. What if instead of feeling abandoned or betrayed, we began to look at these moments as divine interventions? What if we viewed every relationship that comes and goes as a part of God's plan for our lives? What if we understood that the people who leave may be leaving so that we can meet the people who are going to take us to the next level? Sometimes the wrong people have to leave in order for the right ones to show up. There's a story in the Bible that illustrates this perfectly. God called Abraham to leave his home, his family, and everything he knew to go to a place he had never been before. Abraham was obedient. But along the way, he brought Lot, his nephew, with him. Lot traveled with Abraham, and they both became very wealthy. But as time went on, the relationship between Abraham and Lot began to strain. Their herds grew too large, and there wasn't enough land for both of them. At this point, God spoke to Abraham and told him to separate from Lot. It was a difficult decision, but Abraham trusted God. He knew that in order for him to step into the fullness of the blessing that God had for him, he had to let Lot go. Sometimes God calls us to let go of people who have walked with us for a long time. It doesn't mean they're bad people, but rather that they may no longer be a part of the next season of our lives. They may have served a purpose for a season, but now it's time for you to walk alone or with new people who are aligned with God's will for your future. We must also recognize that some relationships are toxic by nature. These are the people who drain our energy, fill our minds with negativity, and undermine our confidence. They may be friends, family members, or even colleagues. Whatever their relationship to us, they have a detrimental effect on our mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. These individuals might always be quick to criticize, slow to encourage, and even quicker to point out your failures. And the longer we stay connected to them, the more their negativity begins to take root in our hearts. God in His mercy steps in to remove them from our lives. It's not that they are beyond redemption or that we're better than them, but it's that God has a plan for us that requires us to be surrounded by people who will build us up, not tear us down. Let's be clear. Removal doesn't always mean a dramatic breakup or separation. Sometimes the removal is subtle. People may drift away naturally, or the relationship may shift in ways that no longer align with your values or purpose. It may not always be a dramatic goodbye, but more of a soft, gradual pulling apart. But when God is in it, we can trust that it is for our good. Every time God closes a door, it's because He's opening another one that will lead us to a better place. When God removes the wrong people from your life, He is making space for people who will add to your growth. These are the people who will walk with you into your destiny. These are the ones who will push you to be your best, not because of what they can get from you, but because they genuinely want to see you succeed. They will challenge you, not to make you uncomfortable, but to help you grow into the person God has created you to be. These people will not pull you down, but will help you rise higher. They will support your dreams, pray for your success, and celebrate your victories. God knows who belongs in your life, and He knows who doesn't. He's never wrong, and His decisions are always for your good. So when people start leaving, don't be upset, don't be afraid, don't be anxious. Rejoice, for God is clearing the path for something greater. Your best days are ahead of you, and in order to walk into them, you have to be free from the wrong people. The right people are coming. God is preparing them for you, and when they arrive, you'll be ready to receive them. When God removes people from our lives, it's not punishment, but an act of love and protection. Some individuals may be toxic or distract us from our divine purpose, and by removing them, God ensures we stay on the right path toward our destiny. Not every person is meant to stay in our lives forever. Some are there for a season, a reason, or a lesson. Once their purpose in our lives is fulfilled, God steps in to move them out, making space for the right people who will elevate and support us in the next season of our journey. We may not always understand why certain people leave, but God has a perfect plan for us. When the wrong people leave, it's often to prepare us for the arrival of the right people, those who will build us up, challenge us positively, and align with our God-given purpose. When we look at our lives, we often find ourselves surrounded by different people, family, friends, colleagues, mentors, and sometimes even strangers who become part of our journey. Many of these relationships are vital to our personal growth and success, but some are not. Some people may be in our lives for a season, some for a reason, and others may be in our lives for a lifetime. However, there are times when we may find that people who have been close to us suddenly drift away or are removed from our lives. These moments, though painful and confusing, are often acts of divine intervention. When God removes people from our lives, it is not an act of cruelty, but rather an act of protection and growth. It is often God's way of ensuring that we are not held back by relationships that are preventing us from becoming who He has created us to be. We may not always understand why certain people leave our lives, especially if they were once close to us. The pain and the emotional scars left behind can sometimes cloud our understanding. We may even find ourselves questioning why God would allow someone to leave or why he would make the decision for someone to walk out of our lives. But if we take a moment to reflect and trust in God's perfect plan, we begin to see that his decisions are not meant to harm us, but to help us grow. God's perspective on relationships is far greater than ours. He sees things that we cannot, and he understands the impact certain people have on our lives, even when we don't. One of the primary ways that God protects us is by removing people who have a toxic influence on our lives. Toxic people are those who drain our energy, undermine our confidence, and lead us away from God's purpose for us. These individuals may not always have bad intentions, but their presence in our lives can still have a negative impact. They may be overly critical, unsupportive, or manipulative, causing us to second-guess our decisions, doubt our abilities, or feel inadequate. They may distract us from the path that God has set before us, making it difficult to hear his voice or follow his leading. In these situations, God removes them because he knows that we need to be surrounded by people who lift us up, not tear us down. He knows that in order for us to fulfill the purpose he has for our lives, we cannot afford to be weighed down by negativity or toxic influence. God's protection also comes in the form of removing people who may be leading us into sin or disobedience. Sometimes we form relationships with people who knowingly or unknowingly pull us away from our faith. They may encourage behaviors that go against our beliefs, challenge our convictions, or make us feel like we have to compromise our values in order to fit in or be accepted. These kinds of relationships can be incredibly damaging, not only to our spiritual health, but also to our emotional and mental well-being. God, in his love and wisdom, sees the danger these people pose to our spiritual lives, and he steps in to remove them. He doesn't want us to be led astray or fall into temptation. He desires for us to remain steadfast in our faith and to walk in obedience to his word. Removing the wrong people is a way of safeguarding us from making choices that could derail our destiny. Sometimes God removes people for our growth and elevation. We may be surrounded by individuals who, while not necessarily toxic, are not aligned with the next phase of our lives. They may have served a purpose in helping us get to where we are, but their role in our lives has come to an end. These people may have been there for support during a difficult season, or they may have taught us valuable lessons, but now they are no longer in a position to encourage us to reach higher or push us forward. They may have become complacent, content with the status quo, or unwilling to challenge us to go further. God knows that in order for us to continue growing and evolving, we need to be surrounded by people who will inspire us to go to the next level. When God removes people who were once close to us, it can be a sign that he is preparing us for something bigger and better. These individuals may have been in our lives for a season, but now it's time for us to move forward. God's plan for us often requires change. And with change comes the need for new relationships and new perspectives. Sometimes, in order to step into the next phase of our purpose, we must first let go of what is comfortable and familiar. It's not easy, but it is necessary. God wants us to be free to embrace the new opportunities he is bringing into our lives, and that often means saying goodbye to people who are no longer a part of that plan. God also removes people for our emotional and mental well-being. There are times when relationships can become a source of constant stress and anxiety. Some people may be in our lives who don't have our best interests at heart. These individuals may use us, take advantage of our kindness, or manipulate our emotions. They may leave us feeling drained, overwhelmed, and unsure of ourselves. Over time, these toxic relationships can affect our ability to think clearly and make sound decisions. They may cause us to question our worth or feel trapped in a cycle of emotional turmoil. In these situations, God in his mercy intervenes and removes these individuals from our lives to allow us the space to heal and regain our emotional strength. God's ultimate goal for our lives is that we would grow, flourish, and become everything He has designed us to be. He doesn't want us to be held back by the wrong people, whether that means individuals who are toxic, those who lead us astray, or those who simply don't belong in our future. God's love for us is so deep and so pure that He will remove anything or anyone that could hinder us from stepping into the fullness of our purpose. Though the process may be painful, it is always for our good. Trusting God through these seasons of removal is essential because He sees the bigger picture. He sees the people who will come into our lives next, the opportunities that await us, and the destiny that is ahead. When we allow Him to remove the wrong people, we make space for the right ones to enter, those who will encourage, support, and help us grow into the people God has called us to be. It's important to remember that God is never in the business of hurting us. His heart is always for our good. Even when the process of removal is difficult, it is an act of love. He is protecting us from harm, ensuring that we are surrounded by people who will help us become all that He has intended. When God removes people from our lives, we can rest assured that He is doing so for our benefit. As we trust Him through the process, we will come to understand that every removal was a step toward greater purpose, greater freedom, and greater fulfillment in Him. Our lives are full of relationships that shift and change over time, sometimes dramatically, and other times more subtly. These relationships can be with family, friends, mentors, colleagues, or even romantic partners. There are moments when we find ourselves deeply connected to someone, and it feels as if this bond will last forever. We believe that these people will always be by our side, sharing in our joys and helping us through our struggles. However, over time, we often realize that some relationships were meant for a season, a reason, or a lesson rather than a lifetime. Understanding this concept helps us accept the natural ebb and flow of life and grow in wisdom and resilience. Seasons in relationships, just like seasons in nature, are inevitable. They are cyclical, and they allow for transformation, growth, and renewal. Just as winter clears the way for spring and autumn gives space for new growth, relationships often go through phases that prepare us for something new. Some people enter our lives to teach us something we wouldn't learn otherwise. And once we've learned that lesson, it's time for them to move on, and for us to move on too. These relationships are not meant to last forever, but their impact is lasting because of the lessons, insights, or wisdom they impart. There is no doubt that part of the challenge of relationships is understanding when to let go. Letting go of someone doesn't mean that you have to hate them or that they were bad for you, but rather that their role in your life has come to an end. Just as we would not expect the same weather patterns year-round, we cannot expect every relationship to be constant. Sometimes the people we hold closest to our hearts are only meant to be there for a specific time and purpose. Holding on to these relationships beyond their season can often prevent us from stepping into the next chapter of our lives. Consider a time in your life when you felt an intense connection with someone, perhaps a friend or partner who was there for you in ways that felt essential. There may have been laughter, adventure, and shared experiences that shaped who you were at that time. But as time went on, you might have noticed subtle changes. The bond you once shared began to shift, and you found yourselves growing in different directions. What you once had in common no longer felt as relevant, and the connection started to feel forced or awkward. These moments can be difficult because we often resist change, particularly when it involves someone who was once such a big part of our lives. But instead of seeing these changes as a failure, we can view them as an opportunity to acknowledge the season of that relationship and let go with grace. Some relationships, especially those that we form in our younger years, are meant to shape our identities, introduce us to new experiences, or teach us important lessons about love, trust, and companionship. These people may come into our lives during a period of personal transformation, helping us navigate significant transitions. But once those transitions are complete, or once we have gained the wisdom we need, the relationship may no longer be as aligned with our current path. It's natural to outgrow certain people, especially if they no longer contribute to the direction we are heading. The truth is that people, like seasons, change. Our interests evolve, our values become clearer, and we grow into new versions of ourselves. The people who were once in sync with us may no longer align with who we are becoming. While this can be uncomfortable and even painful, it is necessary for our personal growth. Each season in our lives presents new opportunities, and in order to step into those opportunities, we must release the things, sometimes even the people, that no longer serve us. One of the most common reasons people hold on to relationships past their season is fear. Fear of loneliness, fear of change, or fear of not finding someone else who understands us as deeply as the person we are trying to hold on to. The comfort of familiarity can sometimes overshadow the truth that the season has ended. However, we must remember that letting go does not mean we are alone, nor does it mean that new connections will not be just as meaningful. In fact, holding on to relationships past their natural expiration can limit our ability to form new, more aligned connections with people who are meant to be in our future. Just as a tree sheds its leaves in fall to prepare for new growth in spring, we too must shed relationships that no longer fit our lives in order to create space for what is next. Relationships that have run their course may also feel like a burden, preventing us from moving forward. There is a certain weight that comes with holding on to something that is no longer beneficial, and this weight can take an emotional toll on us. This may manifest as feelings of frustration, resentment, or sadness. When we realize that a relationship has reached its natural end, we often experience a mix of emotions. We may feel guilt for letting go, sadness for what once was, or confusion about how to move forward. These emotions are normal, but it's important to recognize that the end of one chapter opens the door to a new beginning. Holding on to a relationship that has run its course not only prevents growth, but also keeps us stuck in the past. There is also the idea of mutual growth within relationships. Sometimes people enter and exit our lives based on the trajectory of their own personal growth. Relationships are often most fulfilling when both people are growing and evolving together. However, if one person is growing in a different direction, it can cause the relationship to stagnate. When both individuals in a relationship can no longer support each other's growth, it becomes harder to maintain the connection. In these cases, it's important to acknowledge that the relationship may no longer be serving its intended purpose. It's not that either person is wrong, but rather that the time has come for each individual to walk a separate path. We need to be willing to allow ourselves and others the freedom to grow independently, knowing that it's part of the natural progression of life. There are also relationships that serve a specific purpose, but are not meant to last long term. These can be friendships or encounters that happen at critical moments in our lives. A mentor may come into our life when we need guidance during a particular career or life decision. A friendship might bloom during a challenging time, helping us navigate through a season of hardship. These relationships are vital for the time in which they exist, but their role in our lives may not continue indefinitely. When that time has passed, it's okay to acknowledge that the relationship served its purpose and that we are now ready to move forward. The truth is, every relationship, regardless of its duration, shapes who we are and contributes to our personal journey. Some relationships teach us lessons in love, compassion, and understanding, while others help us learn about boundaries, self-worth, and resilience. Each person who enters our lives leaves an imprint, and even if they only stay for a season, that season has meaning. When we reflect on the relationships that have come and gone, we often realize that they were crucial to our development and growth. While it's difficult to accept, relationships sometimes end because they have simply run their course. They may no longer add value to our lives, or they may be holding us back from the person we are meant to become. Recognizing that relationships have seasons helps us navigate life's transitions with grace. It allows us to let go of what no longer serves us and to make room for what is yet to come. Change can be difficult, but it's also an essential part of life, and it is through these changes that we grow into the people we are meant to be. Understanding that relationships evolve and that some are only meant for a season helps us embrace the natural flow of life, release attachments, and move forward with clarity and purpose. Trusting in God's timing and plan is often one of the most challenging aspects of our faith journey. As humans, we are wired for immediacy. We want things to happen on our terms, according to our schedules, and at the pace we dictate. Yet God operates on a different plane, and his ways and timing are not always aligned with our expectations. Trusting in God's timing and plan requires us to surrender control and embrace the unknown, knowing that he is orchestrating every detail of our lives with purpose and precision. It is through this surrender that we truly experience peace and fulfillment, even in the midst of uncertainty. One of the most common struggles we face is the waiting period. Whether it's waiting for the right job, the right relationship, or the breakthrough we've been praying for, the waiting process can often feel unbearable. During these seasons of waiting, it's easy to feel as though God has forgotten us, or that he is indifferent to our desires. However, the truth is that God's timing is never delayed and he is never late. It may seem like we are in a holding pattern, but in reality, God is doing a deep work in us during this time. He is preparing us, refining us, and aligning things behind the scenes to bring about his perfect plan for our lives. God's plan for our lives is far greater than anything we could ever imagine for ourselves. His vision is eternal, while our understanding is limited by time and circumstance. We may think we know what's best for us, but God in his infinite wisdom sees the bigger picture. He knows where we need to be, who we need to be with, and when the right moment will come. Our job is to trust that he is in control and that he is working everything out for our good. The waiting, though difficult, is not a delay. It's part of the process of preparing us for what is ahead. There is a passage in the Bible that beautifully illustrates the importance of trusting in God's timing. Proverbs 3:5-6, which says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him and he will make your path straight." This verse reminds us that we are not meant to rely on our limited perspective. God sees everything, past, present, and future. And his timing is perfect. When we submit our plans and desires to him, we are acknowledging that his way is higher and better than ours. We are choosing to trust that he knows what we need and when we need it. One of the reasons we struggle with trusting in God's timing is that we often try to force things to happen in our own strength. We push and strive, believing that if we just work hard enough or make enough effort, we will eventually get what we want. While hard work and perseverance are important, there is also a time to rest in God's timing and allow him to open the doors that are meant for us. It's not about forcing something to happen, but rather waiting for God's direction and guidance. Trusting in God's plan means that we are willing to step back and allow him to lead us, even when it feels uncomfortable or uncertain. God's timing often doesn't make sense from a human perspective. It can seem like things are moving too slowly, or worse, not moving at all. We may question why certain doors haven't opened, why certain prayers haven't been answered, or why we haven't received what we asked for. However, God's delays are not denials. Just because something hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't. It may simply mean that the time is not yet right, or that God is preparing something better than we could ever imagine. Sometimes we need to wait not because we're being punished, but because God is aligning circumstances and people in ways that will make our breakthrough even more meaningful. The Bible is full of examples of people who had to trust in God's timing. One of the most notable is the story of Joseph. As a young man, Joseph was given a dream by God, one in which his brothers would one day bow down to him. He shared this dream with his family, but instead of receiving it with joy, his brothers became jealous and sold him into slavery. For many years, Joseph's life seemed to go in the opposite direction of his dream. He endured betrayal, imprisonment, and hardship. Yet throughout it all, Joseph trusted in God's timing. He understood that God had a plan, even when things seemed bleak. Ultimately, God's timing was perfect, and Joseph's dream was fulfilled when he was placed in a position of power to save his family and the entire nation of Egypt. Joseph's story is a powerful reminder that even when life doesn't unfold the way we expect, God is always working behind the scenes to bring his plan to fruition. Another example is the story of Abraham and Sarah. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, but years passed and Abraham and Sarah remained childless. Sarah, in her impatience, suggested that Abraham have a child with her servant, Hagar, in order to fulfill God's promise. However, this was not God's plan. It wasn't until many years later, when Sarah was well beyond childbearing age, that God fulfilled his promise and gave them a son. Abraham and Sarah had to wait for God's perfect timing, and in the end, his plan was far more miraculous than anything they could have imagined. In our own lives, we often find ourselves in situations that require us to trust in God's timing. Whether it's waiting for the right job, the right relationship, or the right opportunity, it's easy to become discouraged when things don't happen as quickly as we would like. But in those moments, it's important to remember that God's plan is unfolding in ways we cannot see. We may not understand why things are happening the way they are, but we can trust that God is working behind the scenes. His timing is perfect, and he will bring things into our lives at just the right moment. One of the most important aspects of trusting in God's timing is patience. Patience is not just the ability to wait, but the ability to wait with a positive attitude, knowing that God is at work. It's easy to become frustrated or anxious when we don't see immediate results, but patience allows us to rest in the knowledge that God is sovereign and that his plan is unfolding exactly as it should. When we trust in God's timing, we can wait with peace and confidence, knowing that he will bring about his perfect will in our lives. Trusting in God's timing and plan also requires us to let go of control. We often want to dictate the terms of our lives, choosing when and how things will happen. But when we truly trust God, we surrender our need for control and allow him to guide us. This surrender doesn't mean that we stop working or stop praying. Rather, it means that we choose to rest in his perfect wisdom and his perfect timing. God's plan is always for our good, even when we don't understand it. His ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. When we trust in God's timing, we acknowledge that he knows what is best for us. We choose to believe that even when things don't make sense, God is working everything out for our good. This trust is not blind optimism, but a deep faith in the character of God, who is always faithful, always good, and always working on our behalf. Trusting in God's timing is not easy, especially when we are in the midst of uncertainty. But when we choose to trust him, we open ourselves up to the peace that comes from knowing that he is in control. We may not always understand his timing, but we can trust that it is always perfect. As we wait for God's plan to unfold, we can have confidence that he is faithful to fulfill his promises. Our job is to trust him, surrender our plans, and rest in the knowledge that he is working everything out for our good.